Frederick Douglass was an African-American slave who became an abolitionist and a great orator. He was a slave who saw some of the worst brutality of slavery, and a slave who became a free man. In Talbot County, along the eastern shore of Maryland near a quiet creek called the Tuckahoe, Douglass was born. His mother worked on another plantation, and he never knew who his father was, but suspected his master, Aaron Anthony. Raised by his grandmother, Frederick lived a carefree life until the age of 6. That carefree childhood came to an abrupt end, and he was assigned to become companion and caretaker of a child of the owner of the plantation. He began to realize that someone had complete control over his life and had a feeling of deep hopelessness. In 1845, when Frederick Douglass came of age at the Lloyd Plantation, he witnessed the brutal beating of his Aunt Hester by Aaron Anthony, the master of the plantation. This, he thought, was an inhuman act. When Frederick was moved to a new plantation owned by Hugh Ault, he learned to read from his mistress. He also tricked his white childhood acquaintances into sharing their homework and books with him. At the age of 15, Douglass was moved across the Chesapeake Bay to become a laborer. He was away from the plantation and able to experience a picture of urban life. In Baltimore, Douglass was hired onto a shipyard for a slave job, where he learned the trade of a ship's caulker. He was allowed to keep a portion of his wage that he would use to buy his first book. The first book that Douglass read was The Columbian Orator, which was a collection of famous speeches. He meets a woman he would soon marry by the name of Anna Murray. In 1838, Douglass devises a plan to escape to the north. Anna Murray gives him money to aid in the escape. He has papers that will allow him to pass as a sailor. This enables him to ride a train to Wilmington, Delaware. He takes a steamboat to Philadelphia. When in Pennsylvania, he is in a free state. He continued to New York, where he was joined by Anna Murray. It was there they were married, and they continued their journey to New Bedford, Massachusetts. Unfortunately, Douglass was met with racism and unable to get a job as a caulker because white laborers wouldn't work beside a black caulker. He gets a job cutting wood and struggled to survive. Within months of his arrival in New Bedford, Douglass learned of the abolitionist movement and began to read The Liberator, a newspaper that belonged to abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison. Douglass later spoke at Garrison's anti-slavery convention in Nantucket about his life as a slave. Garrison was very impressed with Douglass's oration skills, and he thought he could be a great help to the anti-slavery cause. By 1843, Douglass had gone with Garrison on over 100 conventions. In 1845, Douglass publishes his autobiography, which gives details about his life as a slave. He must now fear for his capture by his owners, because he is not yet a free man. Douglas fled to England, fearing being taken back to slavery. While there, his friends gather money to buy his freedom, and he returns to the U.S. a free man. When Douglas returns to Rochester, he publishes a newspaper and calls it the North Star. Frederick Douglass and his wife had 5 children, 2 of which helped him on his paper, which he renamed Frederick Douglass Paper. In the 1850s, it was in Rochester that he met abolitionist John Brown, who felt slavery could only be ended by force. John Brown led a revolt in Harper's Ferry, Virginia. It was unsuccessful, and he and his men were hung for treason. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president. The South secedes from the Union. April 12, 1861, federal troops bombarded Fort Sumter, South Carolina, beginning the Civil War. Douglass continues to lecture and write, and argues that blacks should be allowed to fight. By 1862, Lincoln announces his Emancipation Proclamation. One of the provisions was that African Americans could be appointed as soldiers to fight. He purchased a home called Cedar Hills, above the hills of Washington, D.C. Douglass was appointed Marshal of the District of Columbia. In 1882, his wife passed away. Douglass continued to lecture and fight for reform, in particular equal rights for women. In 1884, he remarries Helen Pitts, a white woman who worked in his office. It was then that Douglass came to the realization that he was still just another black man stepping across the bounds of American society's mores. Born a slave, now stood a statesman. He was appointed Minister of Haiti by President Benjamin Harrison. At the age of 78, Douglass suffered a stroke in his home and passed away. All will remember his great voice, never wavering from his cause, full equality for African Americans.